I thought I was donating my eggs to help a family, but then I saw a child at the mall who looked exactly like me. I was 23 when I walked into that white-walled clinic with trembling hands and hopeful eyes. I wasn't rich or married or even close to having a family of my own, but I knew how badly some women wanted children. Women who couldn't carry, who couldn't conceive. I thought, if I could give someone that chance, why wouldn't I? Of course, the money helped too. I just finished my degree in microbiology, and student debt felt like a drowning current pulling me under every time I dared to breathe. Egg donation seemed like a miracle fix: one cycle, a few injections, and enough money to cover my rent for the year. The clinic was clean, polished. The woman who walked me through everything wore pearls and spoke like a therapist. Her name was Dr. Adrienne Wolf, and I'll never forget how her eyes sparkled when she said, "You're exactly the type of donor we hope for: healthy, intelligent, beautiful. Your genes will change someone's life." That line stuck with me for years. It felt noble, like I was being chosen to pass something sacred along. They made me sign forms, dozens of them. Contracts full of words I pretended to understand. No legal claim to the child. No identifying information. Complete anonymity. No future contact. I told myself that was okay, that I didn't need to know anything about the recipient. I was just the helper, the vessel. They retrieved the eggs 2 weeks later. I remember the cold of the surgery table, the sting of the four, and waking up with cramps in a pastel recovery room with a soft blanket over my knees. I smiled when Dr. Wolf peeked in and said, "Everything went perfectly." That was it. No follow-up, no emotional check-in. Just a check mailed to my apartment and a folder with a generic thank you note from the family. And then, life moved on. I never told my parents. They were old-fashioned and would have called it playing God. I didn't tell my boyfriend at the time either. We'd only been dating a few months, and he still flinched at the word commitment. It was easier to keep it tucked away as a secret kindness I'd done. Something that didn't define me. I finished my degree, got a job at a pharmaceutical lab, moved to a new city, broke up with the boyfriend, dated again, failed again. Life blurred into deadlines and heartbreaks and quiet apartment dinners where I sometimes wondered, is someone out there raising a child with my smile? I thought about it sometimes, late at night. I pictured a warm home, a grateful mother, maybe two dads. Someone who loved that baby so fiercely they cried the day they were born. That's what I told myself. That's what I needed to believe. It wasn't until 6 years later, when I walked into a mall on a rainy Sunday afternoon, that everything I believed turned to ash. The food court was loud, teenagers squealing near the frozen yogurt kiosk, a toddler crying somewhere by the carousel, and the smell of pretzels thick in the air. I wasn't planning to stay long, just needed to grab a new charger and maybe a coffee. That's when I saw her. She couldn't have been older than 5, maybe 6. Curly chestnut hair. Big brown eyes with a fleck of gold in the left one. A tiny freckle above her lip. My heart skipped a beat. Not because she was adorable, she was, but because I had that exact freckle. And those same flecks in my eyes. She was standing beside a woman, mid-30s, thin, with platinum blonde hair and designer sunglasses perched on her head like a crown. She was scrolling through her phone, barely paying attention, while the little girl tugged on her sleeve and pointed toward the candy store. My breath caught in my throat. It was like looking into a warped mirror. That little girl looked more like me than my own baby photos did. I turned and walked in the opposite direction, heart pounding, palms sweating. It's a coincidence, I told myself. A weird one. Genetics are tricky. Plenty of kids look like strangers. That doesn't mean anything. But I couldn't stop thinking about her. I sat in my car for nearly an hour, watching people go by until finally, shakily, I pulled out my phone. I Googled the name of the clinic where I donated. They'd shut down 3 years ago. Shut down. No new number. No address. Just a small article on page 5 of an old medical board journal. Fertility clinic closed amid allegations of improper use of genetic material. My blood ran cold. Improper use? I clicked on the article, hands trembling. It was vague, deliberately so. Anonymous sources, legal stonewalling. But one line made my stomach twist. An internal audit raised questions about whether certain donor eggs were used beyond the scope of consent, including cases of embryos being implanted into surrogate carriers without full documentation. Surrogates? I'd signed forms agreeing to donate to families, couples, someone longing for a child. Not commercial surrogacy. Not designer baby breeding. And suddenly, I remembered something. A week before the egg retrieval, I'd overheard Dr. Wolf speaking to someone in her office while I waited for blood work. She'd said, "The client doesn't want to go through the registry. He wants exclusivity. High IQ, symmetrical features. Just like last time." At the time, I didn't think much of it. Just assumed it was medical talk. But now? Now I felt sick. I drove home in silence, my thoughts racing, pounding against my skull. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles turned white. Who was that little girl? Was she mine? Legally, no. But genetically? She was more me than anyone else on this earth. And if that child had been created, not for a loving family, not through the registry, but as some exclusive genetic product, then what the hell had I actually signed up for? That night, I couldn't sleep. I pored over every email I'd saved from the clinic. Every scanned form. Every dotted signature. There was one document I hadn't noticed before. A PDF buried in a backup folder. Titled simply, Consent Addendum C. I opened it. My stomach flipped. It wasn't the original document I remembered signing. This one included language I'd never seen before. Donor agrees that eggs may be stored for future retrieval cycles or replicated in vitro, with ownership transferring fully to the clinic and its medical partners. Replicated? Future cycles? Replicated? They cloned or multiplied my genetic material? No, 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 no. This wasn't a donation. This was theft. And suddenly, the weight of it all came crashing down. The secrecy. The closure of the clinic. The vague article. The girl in the mall. I hadn't just donated. I'd been harvested. I didn't go to work the next day. I sat at my kitchen table, laptop open, papers spread across the surface like a detective's murder board. Coffee went cold. My eyes burned. But I couldn't stop. Couldn't blink. Couldn't breathe. I kept staring at the PDF, Consent Addendum C, the one I never remembered signing. The digital signature looked like mine. But I knew in my bones I hadn't agreed to anything about replication or future cycles. That wasn't part of the original discussion. It wasn't in the clinic paperwork they gave me in the recovery room. I would have remembered. And yet, here it was. Dated the day after my egg retrieval. I hadn't signed it. Someone else had. Someone had forged my signature. I felt rage rise in my throat like bile. I started searching everything. Digging through old emails, looking up archived records, contacting anyone who might have once worked at the clinic. Most of the doctors had gone silent, moved on. Some had their licenses revoked. Others had conveniently retired. But one former employee still had a LinkedIn. Her name was Rachel Sims, listed as an administrative assistant for Wolf Fertility Group from 6 years ago until the year of the shutdown. I stared at her picture. She looked normal, young, harmless. I messaged her. "Hi Rachel, I'm reaching out regarding something that happened while you worked at Wolf Fertility. I was a donor in 2018. I have questions. Please, I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just need the truth." I didn't expect a reply. But 2 hours later, one came. "You shouldn't be asking about this." That was it. No greeting. No signature. Just that. I stared at the message, fingers hovering over the keyboard. And then I typed back. "I saw a child who looks exactly like me. She's around 5. I think my genetic material was used again, without my consent. And I think your clinic covered it up." The typing bubble blinked on and off. For 5 minutes. Then nothing. Until finally. They told us it was for private clients, not families, not couples. Just people who paid enough. somewhere overseas. One client wanted a child that looked like a Hollywood actress. Another wanted a kid with perfect musical pitch. Dr. Wolf had a list of top donors she kept off registry. You were on it. My chest caved in. Top donor. Off registry. For private clients. They hadn't just used my eggs to help a struggling couple. They'd sold my DNA. I was a product. The betrayal spread through me like wildfire. I dug deeper into Rachel's messages. She eventually agreed to a call, under one condition: no recordings, and no mention of her name if I went public. She told me there had been dozens of off-record donations. Dr. Wolf used falsified paperwork and backdated documents to cover the trails. Sometimes donors were completely unaware their eggs had even been used multiple times. Others, like me, had their signatures forged. She called it a private donor tier, Rachel said. Clients paid 10 times the normal rate. The clinic used that money to stay afloat. Where did the children go? I asked. Pause. Some stayed in the States, but most were placed through elite surrogacy agencies overseas, where laws are looser. No tracking, no obligation to disclose. Do you know who got my eggs? Another pause. Then, only Dr. Wolf would have known. She handpicked every match. She called them legacy builds. Like she was creating a catalog. Legacy builds. I hung up, shaking. This wasn't medicine. This was trafficking. I started stalking them all. It sounds insane, I know. But I couldn't stop thinking about that little girl. Her face haunted my dreams. I had to know who she was, where she lived, who claimed to be her mother. For 3 weeks, I showed up every afternoon around the same time. I'd sit in the food court with a coffee, pretending to scroll my phone while scanning the crowd. Then, finally, there she was again. Same little girl. Same woman. This time, holding her hand, guiding her toward the play area. I followed at a distance. I watched the woman, tall, elegant, distracted, as she handed her phone to the girl and sat on a nearby bench. I got closer. Close enough to hear the child's voice. She spoke softly, in French accented English. She wasn't from here. I waited. Watched. Until the woman pulled out her keys, a BMW fob, and stood up. I followed them out of the mall. Kept my distance. Snapped a photo of the license plate. The car was registered to an international foundation. A surrogacy agency. My heart dropped. They hadn't even pretended she was a biological mother. This was one of Dr. Wolf's private clients. And that little girl? She wasn't just a random coincidence. She was mine. I drove home that night in silence. My ears rang. My chest felt cracked open. I called the number I found for the agency listed under the car registration, Elan Parental Solutions, based in Geneva, Switzerland. A chipper receptionist answered. Bonjour. How may I help you? I'm calling about a child born through your surrogacy program around 5 years ago, I said, forcing calm into my voice. I believe there may have been a medical mix-up with the egg donor records. Do you have a case number? No, I was the donor. Pause. I'm afraid we don't release any information to donors. The profiles are fully anonymized, as per legal. I have proof that my eggs were used without consent. I snapped. And that your agency accepted them from a fraudulent clinic. She fell silent. I have names, messages, documents. I'm not looking for money. I just want the truth. There was a long, long pause. Then, please hold. I waited. The line clicked. A new voice came on, deeper, colder. This is Director Langley, Miss Clara, I said. Clara Fields. We're aware of the situation with Wolf Fertility. An internal review is underway. But any child placed through our agency is legally and ethically protected. So you do have children from my eggs. A pause. I'm not at liberty to confirm that. I could almost hear the smirk through the phone. Tell me, I said, voice trembling. How many people have my face walking around in their homes right now? How many times did they replicate me? Click. He hung up. I sat on the floor of my kitchen, staring at nothing, the silence deafening. This wasn't just one little girl. This was a program. A black market empire built on stolen DNA. My DNA. They had turned me into a template. A ghost mother to God knows how many children across the globe, raised by strangers, sold to the highest bidder, designed for wealth and perfection. They had erased me. And the people responsible? Still walked free. Smiling. Driving imported cars. Raising my children. I looked at myself in the mirror that night and didn't recognize the woman staring back. She was shaking, hollow-eyed, rage humming under her skin like static. That's when I knew. This wasn't over. I wouldn't just sit in silence. I was going to find them. Every one of them. And I was going to make them pay. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that little girl's face, my face, staring back at me. And behind her, I saw rows and rows of others. Variations of me. Children I'd never carried, never named, never kissed goodnight, but who came from me. Born without my knowledge. Sold without my consent. The betrayal had cracked me open. But now it was becoming something else. I wasn't just broken anymore. I was angry. And I wasn't going to be erased quietly. I started with Dr. Adrienne Wolfe. Her clinic may have shut down, but she hadn't vanished. A few hours of deep research told me everything I needed. She was living in Monaco. Private property. New name on the foundation board of a so-called fertility nonprofit. It was almost laughable. She had simply pivoted from selling babies to promoting ethical reproductive equity at European medical conferences. I found a clip of her online, giving a TEDx-style talk. She looked so calm, so rehearsed. Every child deserves to be born into love, she said, smiling to the camera. And every donor must be treated with care, transparency, and dignity. I nearly threw my laptop across the room. The woman who stole from me, who let others build lives from my body like I was a vending machine, was now branding herself as a pioneer of ethics. But that was good. It meant she had something to lose. I couldn't get to her directly, not yet. But I could make sure she felt the first tremors. So I reached out to a journalist. Her name was Faye Brighton, an investigative reporter for a European outlet that had covered fertility scams before. I didn't send her everything, not yet, but I gave her enough to bite. I have records from a closed American clinic, forged donor signatures, and evidence of unauthorized genetic replication tied to a current medical leader in Monaco. She responded within hours. We met via encrypted video call. She was sharp, suspicious at first, but once I showed her the documents and the original consent versus the forged addendum, her face changed. This is huge, she whispered. If what you're saying is true, it's not just malpractice. It's human rights abuse. She wanted to publish immediately, but I made her promise to wait. There's more, I said. And when it all comes out, it has to destroy everyone involved. I wasn't interested in headlines. I wanted ruin. Next, I focused on the families. Or rather, the clients. Because these weren't ordinary people struggling with fertility. They were buyers. And I was the product. Using the license plate I'd snapped at the mall, I found the woman again. Her name was Sabine Duval, a French tech heiress with a portfolio full of silent donations and PR-polished interviews about female empowerment. I found an article in Elle France where she described her daughter as a miracle born through a long and selective international surrogacy journey. Selective. That word echoed in my skull. I waited 2 days, then created a burner email under the name of an anonymous donor advocate group and sent her a message. We believe you may have unknowingly used eggs obtained through illegal means. This child may be genetically linked to a woman who never consented to her DNA being replicated or sold. We urge you to respond before legal proceedings escalate. She replied the next day. Cold. Polite. Terrified beneath the surface. I was told all documents were clear. We followed the agency's process. Please, do not contact us again. Our daughter is innocent. I smiled at that line. Yes, she was innocent. But you? You knew what you were buying. And now I had your name, your address, your weakness. I started a list. Legacy Build recipients. Every client I could track. Every child that could be mine. I contacted whistleblowers, clinic interns, journalists. I found 3 more families in Spain, in Dubai, in New York. Each had children between the ages of 4 and 6. Each had used offshore surrogacy through Elin or its partner clinics. Each had signed NDAs. And not a single one of them had ever heard the name Clara Fields. Because to them, I never existed. I was a profile, a code, a statistic with pretty eyes and high SAT scores. But now, I was real. And I was done being quiet. I hired a lawyer. Not for money, for access. His name was Evan Thorne, a former biotech compliance officer turned legal consultant. I showed him everything: the forged document, the paper trail, the clinic's collapse, and the child I'd seen with my own eyes. He didn't blink. This is the kind of case that terrifies companies, he said, because it's messy, global, and built on vanity. You want a lawsuit? No, I said. I want exposure. He leaned back. Even better. With his help, we filed legal requests for documentation from Elin. They pushed back. Hard. But we'd expected that. And behind the scenes, Faye, the journalist, was gathering momentum. She'd begun interviewing other former donors from Wolf Fertility. Some had stories eerily similar to mine. She promised me that when the story dropped, it would be front page. And the title? Designed Without Consent. Inside the black market world of designer children. Perfect. But we still needed proof. And that meant getting a sample. So I did something reckless. I followed Sabine Duval again. This time to a museum. She took the little girl to a kids' art exhibit. I watched from across the atrium, heart pounding, palms clammy. I waited until they left. Until the child dropped the lollipop stick she'd been chewing. I walked over and picked it up like it was sacred gold. I sent it overnight to Evan's contact, a geneticist who ran discrete tests. 3 weeks later, I got the call. Clara, Evan said, it's a 99.87% match. That child is yours. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there, quiet, letting it soak through my skin like acid. It was real. They'd used me, lied to me, stolen my life, and handed it to someone else wrapped in a designer bow. But now I had proof. And when the story dropped, I'd burn them all. They stole my DNA, my rights, my voice. But now, I had the one thing they couldn't ignore: proof. And I wasn't going to knock politely anymore. I was going to kick the door off its hinges. Faye's expose dropped on a Monday morning, and within an hour, it was everywhere. Front page of The Guardian. A 10-minute feature on BBC. Trending across Europe under the hashtag #ChildrenScandal. Scandal. Her voiceover was cool and sharp as she laid out the facts. A fertility clinic shut down after questionable ethics is now linked to a global surrogacy ring involving unconsented genetic use. At the center of this, Dr. Adrienne Wolf and her off-registry donor program. She didn't use my name, per our agreement, just called me Donor X. But it didn't matter, the damage was done. Wolf's face was suddenly everywhere. News anchors tearing apart her TED Talk. Medical boards scrambling to issue statements. Advocacy groups launching petitions. And best of all, Elin Parental Solutions went dark. Website offline. Social accounts deactivated. And then 2 days later, my lawyer got the call we'd been waiting for. Clara, Evan said, they want to settle. I almost laughed. Settle? They're offering a financial package sealed. They'll remove your profile from their donor library, agree to non-replication, and pay damages. It's substantial. I didn't even ask how much. Because this wasn't about money. This was about them squirming. Tell them no, I said. Tell them I want the names. Evan hesitated. Clara, I want every family who used my eggs. Every child born from me. I want access, contact, everything. And if they don't give it, the next article won't be anonymous. He was quiet for a long time. Then, all right, let's go to war. I ramped it up. I sent legal notices to every international surrogate agency partnered with Wolf's Clinic. One by one, like dominoes, they started falling. Disclaimers appeared on their websites. Reviewing donor procedures. Under investigation. Temporarily suspending matches. Behind the scenes, Evan filed injunctions that forced former Wolf employees to give depositions under oath. One broke. A junior embryologist. He testified that Dr. Wolf had personally instructed them to extract additional cells during my cycle. They cloned embryos, stored backups, even shipped ideal specimens to unnamed third-party labs. When Evan showed me the transcripts, I couldn't breathe. There may be as many as 12 children out there, he said softly. I felt the air leave my lungs. 12. 12 strangers with my face. My laugh. My blood. My life. I thought of the little girl in the mall. How many others were out there? Was one being raised in a mansion in Dubai? One trained to be a violin prodigy in Tokyo? One being shaped like a designer pet for someone with too much money and zero conscience? I was done waiting. It was time for Adrienne Wolf to pay. She finally surfaced 2 weeks later. On a Zoom call with her lawyers, her hair pinned back, her voice smug but tight. Miss Fields, she said, this drama you've unleashed has consequences far beyond your personal emotions. I leaned forward, meeting her gaze through the screen. Good, I said. Let them burn. Her lawyers spoke up. They offered a new settlement, anonymized contact, partial access, an NDA. I refused. And then I showed them what they had uncovered in round 2. Bank records. Offshore transfers. Wolf's private donor ledger. With my code name listed beside at least 5 separate transactions. She stared, pale. You can't prove intent, she whispered. No, I said. But I can prove pattern. Her face cracked for the first time. And then I smiled. Hope you enjoy retirement. In prison. Faye published part 2 that night. The article exploded. Media outlets swarmed Wolf's foundation, her speaking events, her mansion in Monaco. Protesters gathered outside fertility clinics across Europe. A warrant was issued within days. But by then, she'd vanished. Of course she had. Cowards always run when cornered. But it didn't matter. Because the empire she built, it was collapsing. And I was just getting started. 3 weeks later, I received a package. Unmarked. No return address. Inside was a USB drive. And a note that read, You deserve to know. I'm sorry I helped them. R.S. Rachel Sims. The former Wolf assistant I'd spoken to months ago. I plugged the drive into a clean laptop. There were folders. Dozens of them. Each labeled with donor codes, recipient IDs, and surrogacy records. But one folder was marked with my initials. CF17A. I clicked it open. 12 files. 12 children. Photos. Birth records. Locations. I stared at the screen in silence. My heart thudding. One child lived in Manhattan. Another in Prague. One in Seoul. One, heartbreakingly, had died in infancy. I couldn't stop crying. But it wasn't sadness anymore. It was grief mixed with fury. They didn't even tell me. Didn't let me mourn. They used me like a factory. Like a template. And now, I was going to do something they never expected. I contacted the families. One by one. Some ignored me. Others threatened legal action. But 2 responded. The Manhattan couple invited me to meet privately. We met at a quiet cafe. Their daughter, Emma, was 6. Shy. Artistic, obsessed with drawing. They admitted they'd been told I was a donor who'd signed off fully. I looked them in the eyes and said, I didn't. The mother burst into tears. She handed me a picture Emma had drawn, a woman with brown eyes and curly hair. She always draws you. We didn't understand why. Now I do. It broke something open inside me. And in that moment, I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted reclamation. I launched my own foundation, Clara's Law, a movement to pass global regulations protecting donors from genetic misuse and post-procedure cloning. We gained traction fast. Whistleblowers joined. Scientists rallied. Former donors came forward with their own horror stories. Wolf became the poster child of a medical nightmare. And me? I became the face of the fight. Not a victim. Not an afterthought. But a woman who refused to stay silent. But just when I thought it was over, a letter arrived. No name. No address. Just a single line, handwritten on thick cream paper. You haven't found them all. The envelope was heavy in my hand. No return address. No stamps. Just my name, handwritten in neat cursive. Clara Fields. I opened it slowly, the edge of the paper slicing my finger as if the letter itself wanted blood. Inside was a single sheet. No greeting. No explanation. Just one line. You haven't found them all. My hands trembled. I had already tracked 12. 12 children created without my consent. I had photos, birth dates, even voice recordings from 2 of them. My lawyer said there couldn't be more, that the files were complete. But this felt certain. Like someone knew something I didn't. I flipped the envelope over again. Nothing. Except a faint indentation. Barely visible. I held it to the light and saw a watermark. A crescent moon over a building. I recognized it instantly. It was the logo of Solace Institute, a private, unregulated medical research facility in Iceland. Wolf had mentioned them once in a passing article. Called them visionaries in genetic preservation. And suddenly, the phrase from Rachel's file echoed in my mind. Some were shipped to third-party labs. My heart dropped. I thought I had uncovered everything. But the real horror hadn't even begun. I booked a flight the same night. No hesitation. I didn't tell Evan. Didn't tell Faye. Didn't even tell the 2 families I'd stayed in touch with. I had to see it for myself. The facility was remote, built into the side of a cliff, with snow swirling around its glass walls like ghosts. The reception area was pristine. Too pristine. White on white on white. Everything sterile and hushed. I gave a fake name, pretended to be a visiting geneticist from a university. I was escorted by a young man in a gray coat, no badge, no ID. We passed hallways lined with cryo units, storage pods, research wings. Everything was behind glass. I counted 6 security cameras before we reached the restricted floor. I'm sorry, he said, smiling. This level is for legacy clients only. Legacy. There it was again. I nodded politely and waited until he stepped away to speak with a technician. Then I ran. Down a hallway, through a door marked Archive 3. And what I saw made me fall to my knees. Rows of cryo chambers, each labeled with a barcode. And beneath one barcode, a label that read, CF17AR3. CF. Me. And not just me. R3. As in replicant 3. I opened the digital panel beside it. The file loaded slowly. Embryo viability. High. Projected features. Clara Fields variant. Status. Preserved for advanced neuroconditioning program. Projected transfer. Q4 2026. Client. Classified. My stomach twisted. They hadn't just created children. They were still creating them. Not for families. For projects. Experiments. There were at least 3 replicants of me, here, waiting to be implanted. Or worse, studied. I backed away, breath shallow, dizzy with rage and fear. They hadn't stopped after the media storm. They had simply gone underground. I stole what I could. Snapped photos. Grabbed a printed file. Used a stolen keycard to access a data terminal and downloaded encrypted logs. And then I ran again, all the way out, through the back loading dock and into the snow. I didn't stop running until I reached the highway. Didn't stop shaking until I was back in my hotel room with 3 locks on the door. And even then, I couldn't sleep. Because I finally understood. This wasn't a scandal. It wasn't about rogue clinics or donor fraud. It was a system. A global, coordinated industry built around genetic perfection. They weren't just using my DNA for families. They were building a product line. I flew back and told Evan everything. He paled as I showed him the cryo photos, the R3 tag, the classified files. This is beyond anything we've touched so far, he said. This is military adjacent. Government protected. If we go public with this, we'll be hunted. Good, I said. Let them come. We contacted Faye. She didn't hesitate. We finished what we started. Within a week, she released Part 3. Frozen Faces. The global black market of genetic replication and the woman they tried to erase. This time, I let her use my name. Clara Fields. They could no longer hide behind codenames. The article exploded again. Human rights groups called it modern slavery. Medical watchdogs opened new investigations. The UN issued a statement calling it an ethical violation bordering on eugenics. But more than that, people started talking. More donors. More families. More children. The world couldn't unsee it now. And then came the final twist. 2 months later, a child reached out to me directly. Through a private message. She was 13. Her name was Noah. She lived in Austria with a wealthy couple. She had found the article. Had read every word. Had looked at my picture for hours, trying to figure out why she felt connected to it. And then she wrote me. I think you're my real mom. I've never looked like them, but I look like you. I dream about your voice sometimes, even though I've never heard it. Is that possible? I stared at her message for hours. I called her the next day. The second she said hello, I started crying. Because she sounded exactly like me. I flew out to meet her. We sat in a cafe near the river. 2 strangers with matching dimples and crooked laughs. She had questions. So many questions. And for the first time, I had answers. I told her the truth, every word. And when I finished, she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, They can't erase you. Not from me. So here I am. 6 years after donating eggs to help a family. 12 children found. 3 cryo units destroyed. 1 global scandal ignited. But this isn't the end of the story. It's the beginning of a war. Because I'm not the only one they did this to. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure that no donor, no child, no woman's body is ever used like mine was. I was their product. But now, I'm their reckoning.